The following is an Operation Podcast production.
I knew that I was seeking the answers to why our perception of reality becomes distorted by what happens to us in childhood, and how to effectively correct that distortion so that we stop lying to ourselves and can actually take ownership of what we're doing and fix it. One of the markers that we track in brain pattern mapping is essentially how you're perceiving reality and fear and how adaptable or rigid you are from that place. And I remember clear as crystal being 5 years old and having an older version of myself visit me and say, hey, things are gonna get really bad here. And actually having a pretty clear outline of what was going to happen to me.
Are you ready for a wild ride? I'm Alexis Artin, and I invite you to strap in because this is more than a podcast. This is Look at Me Now. Hey, y'all. We are back with another episode of Look at Me Now. And I'm just going to go ahead and call it out right from the start. We have somebody with the best goddamn name I've ever heard.
I appreciate that so much. It's a great name.
Honestly, I was like, I want her on the show just because I have to be friends with somebody that has the name Bizzie Gold.
We can be friends.
We are going to be friends. Just the name alone is like worthy of love and friendship. But seriously, we have a very serious neurocognition expert in the house, an author, the founder, inventor, tech creator of brain pattern mapping. I mean, this is serious, busy business with Bizzie Gold. Let's get down to it. Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm so glad that Chase introduced us. This is such a blessing. It was
Me too.
Unexpected on my travels.
And I always
this week.
love that Chase is like the third invisible person on this podcast. He gets brought up so many times, my podcast producer, Chase. He gets so much love. It's almost like we should just put a third empty chair in here for Chase, I swear.
You could have like a little Chase figurine on the side.
Maybe I should.
His face looks like it would be good for a figurine.
Maybe I should. God, I hope he listens to this podcast and he recognizes how much famous he is on Look at Me Now. Anyway, back to Bizzie. Hi, thank you so much for being here. This is so rad. I'm like so juiced to have this conversation because I'm super into everything that you're up to, and I can't wait to share it with everybody that's listening here today. And you know, as we do, I actually would love to start at like the way back, like let's take the time machine back to the beginnings of like you as a little one, who I know you talk a lot about inner child stuff, as do I, which I deeply appreciate. So like, can you walk us back and sort of like set the stage for how you and this all started?
I think at the core, every human being has a spirit or an essence that is completely unique and individual, that comes from some sort of multidimensional source. I'll let people fill in the blanks however they see fit for themselves. And that spirit comes into the world wanting to experience love, wanting to be able to be curious about its environment, learn rules, test things, try to understand how to operate in its environment. And it wants to feel safe and protected. And often what happens in those early childhood years is not supportive of those three things. So then we have this initial conflict. What the spirit is destined for and believes about its world now starts to have these new patterns that emerge about the world not being safe, or about love not being able to be received by primary caregivers, or maybe some sort of sibling infighting. So we start to shut down and create these formulas about how to keep ourselves safe in our environment. I think for me in those early childhood years, my spirit was already very highly attuned to pattern recognition. And then what happened to me in my childhood had to make that even more augmented to survive. My childhood was extremely chaotic, and I grew up in a family that was very wealthy, had a lot of access, but people don't often realize that the more money, more problems sort of
More
thing.
money, more
More
problems.
money, more problems. That's a real thing. And the problems change, perhaps. If we're talking about poverty, maybe there's neglect, parents aren't home, starving for food, different problems, but problems nonetheless. Constant changing of caregivers, parents constantly away. it appearing that parents were choosing self over love and nurture of the family, right, in pursuit of some sort of financial goal. So what ends up happening is in that childhood environment, you now have a child who has to try to figure out the rules of a game that seem to change all the time. If the person's changing, that means the rules of how to operate with that person start to change. So all this did was, I think, take who I was as a spirit and in a lot of ways just augment some of those innate abilities. So now I was very good at reading people to keep myself safe. I had to learn how to read mom's facial expressions. Was Absolutely. Mom going to be emotionally dysregulated today? What would I have to anticipate or adapt in myself or keep to myself to keep mom stable? Then it became my sister. How did I have to keep my sister stable? Because there was a lot of emotional upheaval and moodiness in my family. And typically when you have that in a system, there tends to be one person
in the constellation
that is
hypervigilant. Yeah,
exactly. And sees it coming and in turn self-regulates and decides self-preservation is not an option for me. So I have to do whatever the group needs to keep the group stabilized. That person was me.
Well, it's funny. We absolutely share a vocabulary and we definitely have a really similar framework of philosophy. So I'm picking up what you're putting down. And, you know, I think it's also important to call out that that person who you're saying like has to be the centrifugal force of regulation, so often they're not even taught how to properly regulate. And therefore, their coping strategies of how they feel they're regulating or the ways that they turn to self-soothe are not actually really regulated. And that is so much of the work that we end up having to do as adults, and which I'm sure you're about to talk about, is how do we actually get to a healthy ability to self-regulate and to self-soothe? Because most people don't know how to do that. It's really fascinating.
I would say that self-regulation and self-soothing to me would be technically separated. It's nuanced, but I think there's some gray area with the two of those. So to me, just in terms of working definitions, there are those who self-regulate and there are those who look to co-regulate. Some of these self-regulating behaviors, for example, may not actually be self-soothing, as an example.
Yes.
So to me, what I would look to is, does this person look to themselves to solve a problem? Do they lean into independence and possibly even hyper independence where they won't let anybody really close
Correct.
to them have any sort of, they won't be exposed or vulnerable around any other people? So to me, those are all the hallmarks of self-regulation, where a person can be in the group sort of drama and chaos and they will essentially, as you nailed it, suppress or dissociate or compartmentalize to get through it, only to then, when they are separated, figure out how they're going to process it. Or maybe, to your point, skip it entirely, reset. I'll figure it out later. It'll be fine. Meanwhile, autoimmune disease, chronic disease issues, right? All the burnout is creeping up from behind while you're just blissfully, positively focused on the future. So those are all the things that obviously, as you noted, could happen on that side. Then there are those who seek to co-regulate. In my work, I've explored patterns in data using 200 historical data markers for the last 11 years, and we've actually turned that into brain pattern mapping technology. There is a very interesting split here, because what ends up happening is that the people that end up on the right side of the brain pattern spectrum, they actually had parents that were loving, supportive, typically married past the age of 12. There are all these markers that they had in their environment. Not necessarily was mom a kind person, right? Then we're kind of transcending into narrative rather than just were they married or were they not married. We're really looking at the more concrete data, not how you feel about the data. We have found that actually those underlying data markers correlate to co-regulation, which makes sense because the parents were around, maybe the parents felt safe to co-regulate. This actually has a negative outcome in adulthood. So to your point, self-regulation, co-regulation, they both have their goods and bads, and ultimately both people need to learn how to do both, and both people only know how to do one. And that is part of what brain pattern mapping helps show us, is that we kind of develop this rut in the system of doing things. So a person like me, I'm much more the self-regulation person. So I've in my adult life had to learn how to let my husband in and say, hey, it's easier for me to go deal with this by myself, but sit down. I'm going to disclose what's going on with you. Don't need you to even do anything. Maybe just need a hug. And perhaps in my 20s, I never would have done that. I would have just been the tough girl that just got right over it. So there are all these ways that we have to learn to oppose the way that we've been patterned, because I need to learn how to both co-regulate, and there are certainly moments that I need to be able to do it on my own. The people that naturally co-regulate, they tend to become needy, clingy, codependent. They're not able to experience emotional resilience, which I know is a huge aspect of your show, because they need somebody else to do it. And naturally needing somebody else to do it inherently is a setup. Because what if that person's communication skills aren't matching their need? What if the other person that they're trying to get their need met from has no idea what they're actually asking for or what they need? Mm-hmm. So naturally, I think human beings are meant to work together. We're meant to co-regulate in select instances, but the way the people that end up having their childhood environment pattern them to the right side of the brain pattern spectrum, it usually is carried out in a way that is either destructive or leads to a reported low quality of life.
So you've hinted at, your childhood, the role that you needed to play, who you needed to be given the family dynamic. And then you sort of hinted also at in your 20s being this sort of, very, what's the phrase that you used? Like, I can do it myself, girl.
I think I was always the do it myself. I've got
this girl, right?
Yes.
So can you walk us through like how we get from that childhood dynamic to the I've got this girl to the girl that you are, the woman that you are now?
Sometimes I still feel like a girl, although I just turned 40. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So in my childhood, the environment that I described put me into a position where I effectively, as an output, had to become the independent girl that could just handle it herself, because nobody was coming to rescue me. People were too emotionally dysregulated and in their own junk to be able to notice if I was having an issue. And then I ended up just constantly serving others. So I think from early childhood, literally until I invented break and then did break myself, I think I was pretty deeply stuck in that rut. And really only in my current marriage have I been able to really navigate myself all the way to being vulnerable and connected and all those things. I think in those middle years, sometimes you know what to do so you can act it out. But I wasn't feeling what I was acting out. I knew what to do. I knew how to check the boxes. Mm-hmm. So maybe even on the other person's side, they felt like I was acting it out enough to experience it. But I knew deep down that it was still an act and not felt. So this is like the first few years of my life that it's a felt, lived experience rather than intellectually knowing what I have to do versus doing it. So the independence, I think, was always something that was really a hallmark of my life, and in a lot of ways served me very well, as it does many people.
We don't do anything unless it serves us.
Right? And I think big picture, if you look at even people who end up typically becoming entrepreneurial top 1% type of people, there is an inherent independence, high level of self-trust, and emotional resilience that typically precedes those sort of success markers. So it served me in my career. In a lot of ways, it served me with all the trauma that I've experienced in my adult life, which I'm sure we will unpack. But where it doesn't serve me 100% is in intimate relationships. And I think in general, that's one of the things that we can see with brain pattern mapping, is that there's always an upside and a downside to everything. So some sort of coping skill or trauma response can actually make you very successful in your career, but that same exact mechanism can destroy an intimate relationship and vice versa.
Every coin has two sides.
Every coin. Yep, that's true.
Every coin. For day there's night, for up there's down, it's equal distance. Everything comes in pairs. You cannot expect to have, a reward or a benefit without an equal drawback or a challenge. It's science, people. It's science.
And it's learning how to create the balance and learning how to not... I'll back up and say this. There are quite a few people that come through my program that eventually they do their brain pattern mapping. They're like, yeah, but these things serve me so well in my business. And I'm like, we're not going to fix something that's not broken. You get to keep doing this in your business. But this same mechanism in your intimate relationships, we have to be able to rewire because it's not serving you there. So luckily, the way synaptic plasticity works is that which we keep doing in a specific instance or nuance, we maintain. Mm-hmm. But if we're able to effectively rewire that mechanism in a different instance or nuance, then we start to, through synaptic plasticity, start to fire those wires apart rather than together. So we don't pair off or kill what is working for you. We only work on the areas that are not currently working for you. And you can be selective. It is a very targeted sort of approach rather than just, well, we just need to do the exact opposite. There is a process, like you said, of balance and equilibrium and making sure that we're able to embody both sides.
Yeah, and you always have personal choice and agency to make those decisions of what you're willing to agree to and what you're not, and so often people don't realize the secondary gain that they're getting from something, and that's why they're actually resistant to change something versus, just owning that fact. Okay, so you've now created this incredible system. Can you walk us into how you got from, being this independent, hypervigilant person who hadn't processed any of this to creating this whole system?
There was a whole lot of trauma in between, which, again, I was already able to handle. So I think I perhaps handled it in a way that instead of it becoming a setback, it did actually become something that propelled me forward. In general, when I'm in a fear state, and I think one of the markers that we track in brain pattern mapping is essentially how you're perceiving reality in fear and how adaptable or rigid you are from that place. I'm very adaptable in fear because that's something that my environment required of me. So in general, when things go really poorly for me or there is some sort of chaos or disaster, I actually get into this weird flow state where I become very clear and focused and creative. And I've actually succeeded like tenfold every single time some sort of really bad trauma has happened to me, because it does kind of force me into this unique flow state where instead of the circumstance being something that I feel like is going to make me cave in and there's no way out, my brain is always looking for a strategic way out. And the more pressure, somehow the better that sort of future focused vision becomes. So I've, I think, been really compressed kind of like a diamond in this way by every traumatic event that's happened to me. I think honestly for me in high school, I have had a series of losing intimate partners, which certainly impacted me. My high school sweetheart boyfriend passed away when I was in high school. And that was the first time that I really experienced death. And up to that point, one of the byproducts of this kind of coping mechanism strategy that I'd created was that I did have really severe panic attacks. So my strategy was to self-regulate in complete and utter despair with panic attacks. Meanwhile, everyone else thought that I was a totally different person. Right? So that's one of the ways that no matter how much you compartmentalize or can mask it, your nervous system is not necessarily going to come into agreement with that. And certainly my body was no different. So once this death happened, I think it pushed me into, I think, more of an existential crisis too, because then I really had to face that I had no spiritual foundation either. And then like, what does happen when you die? Because at this point I was probably 16 or 17. And early in my life, I was always very keen on understanding who God was. I was very spiritual. And this one recurring theme in my family was that really my parents were very anti and like not just atheistic, but would intentionally say certain things to try to get me to turn on what I innately knew to be true. And one of the things that stands out is my mom would always read me this bedtime book when I was very, very little. And it was about bedtime routines, brush your teeth, wash your face, pick your pajamas.
I read these to my kids. Yeah.
And there was a page where she would kneel down and pray the Lord's Prayer before she would get in bed. And my mom would always systematically skip this page. So at some point I'm like, Mom, why do you keep skipping this page? And my mom looked me dead in the eyes and goes, because God's not real. And I'm like, okay. So I remember just even, that was probably like age 3.
I was going to say, what age were you?
Yeah, that was probably age 3. It was one of those very early core memories that just stuck with me for a long time, because it was the first time that I actually said something to her. Because I had likely been thinking about it for a while, because it would happen every night. And then one day I was just like, what's the deal here? So I was obviously getting like just precocious enough to push back against her and just question it. So I think at that point it started to introduce this conflict where I was always from a very young age very spiritually attuned. Honestly, I was even like seeing things in the spirit realm, and I would talk to my parents about it and they'd be like, oh, no, that's not real. One day, and we still have this picture to date, I grew up part-time after my parents got divorced in a house in Connecticut, and we had this breakfast nook that had a huge window seat, you know, where you have like, you kind of sit into it and there's windows all around.
Yeah.
At this one point we were taking a family picture, and I was born in 1985, so this was probably like 1989 or 90, you know, when like people had like the real flash cameras where everyone's eyes came out bright red and all that. So everyone was posing in this window seat for a family picture. I don't remember what holiday it was, but it was something like that where there were a lot of us. And in the picture, I'm pulling away from my mom, pointing in the reflection in the window, which is, it's pitch black dark outside. And I'm telling my mom what I keep seeing. And you can see her visibly yelling at me because I'm like trying to pull away, and I'm like, and it looked like, the only thing I can describe is like the Native Americans that have the mohawk, where it's like really angular face shape. And it was literally right outside the window. And I knew it wasn't physically there, but I could see it and I could feel it there. And in the picture, I'm pulling away from my mom. She's trying to pull me back into the window seat, clearly yelling at me, and clear as day. Somehow, the way the light from this flash hit the window, you can see it. Totally clear. And my mom took the picture. She was very fanatical about photo albums. And she kept it and flipped it backwards behind another picture. And one day I'm looking through, because I knew that happened, but she never acknowledged it to me. So one day I'm flipping through photo albums, and I feel that one of them is a little bit thicker. So I pull it out and I look at it and I'm like, you little a-hole. Why'd you keep this one? And she's like, I don't want to talk about that. And I'm like, well, but you kept it because why? She's like, because I can see what you were seeing. And I'm like, okay, so maybe my whole childhood I wasn't making it up. And she's like, yeah, maybe. Can you put that back? I'm like, oh, so you still want to keep it? Okay. Flip it back behind. So there was just a lot of that sort of invalidation in me, basically having my parents try to get me to turn on things that I really innately and spiritually knew. Gaslighting, definitely. And I think for better or for worse, I don't think they knew they were doing it. That was just their belief system. I think they really felt like maybe they were protecting me from some sort of religious trauma that had happened to them.
Always comes from a place of their own, right, internal navigation system. It's really, it's so about them, and it's not about you at all.
Absolutely.
But as children, we don't receive it that way.
Well, and it still leaves a mark.
Of course.
Every input has an output, and you just can't get around that. And even, and I'm sure you talk to people about this all the time, it can be really challenging for people to face the truth of what actually happened without feeling like they're disrespecting their parents. So I always have my clients go through a process of really separating those two things, because you can love and respect and be grateful for sacrifices and how hard somebody tried. And there are also ways that it was not enough and it wasn't the right thing to do, and it did leave a mark. So I think in those ways, I've definitely gone through my own process where I have so much, probably too much empathy, honestly, for people naturally. And in these cases, I don't ever look back at these things with any sort of anger or regret or resentment. I'm actually really grateful, because I think they did fortify me to be who I am. And I think, have to go through a little bit of that struggle to be maybe pushed from the outside and peer pressured, only to then emerge even more clear on who I am and what I know. So, and I think ultimately that's what trauma and pain can teach you, if you're present to it. And I think a lot of people aren't present.
I've gotten my greatest gifts from my worst moments. I say that all the time. There is really nothing like trial by fire to teach you who you are and what you're capable of. Absolutely. Okay, so this is, a great lead-in to telling us a little bit more about, what happened after this trauma of losing your childhood sweetheart or your high school sweetheart, to starting to like gather all of the personal experience you need to start moving you in the direction of not only healing yourself, but helping to heal others. So can you take us to what happens next?
Absolutely. So at this point, my anxiety, rather than getting better, certainly became worse. And this is now trending toward going to college. And in college, my first year, I was so overcome by anxiety. And every single time I'd have a panic attack, now that I was more separated from friends and family, I just kept going to the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack, which ultimately, like, of course, at a certain point, you know, logically I'm not having a heart attack, but it feels so real in the moment. And at a certain point, my dad was like, listen, Biz, I love you. If you go to the hospital one more time, I'm cutting you off my insurance. Like, you can't do this anymore. This has to stop. So this is just, it's an example, because people that know me now, I'm so relaxed and I don't have any anxiety. So when people hear this, they're like, wait, what?
Isn't it?
It's
wild?
I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, I know.
And I was literally thinking about this on the plane ride here. At this point in my life, my nervous system was obviously screaming for help, and it had been for so many years, which is why I think my panic attacks ultimately escalated, because at a certain point, I wasn't thinking anything. My nervous system was just in full meltdown. And when I would look forward to my future, I would just constantly frame it in, what am I ever going to do with my life? Like, I'm afraid to go on a plane. I'm afraid to go on long drives. I'm afraid to do everything. Like, what, I should just throw in the towel. What am I ever going to do? So it's like I knew I had all this raw talent, but my panic attacks were just limiting what I thought I was capable of to such a strong degree. And as I was sitting on the plane yesterday flying into LA, I just had this moment where I'm like, my first book is coming out. I have all these different companies. I cannot believe where I'm at in my life right now. And I'm sitting on a plane sober and relaxed. And if I could go back and tell 19-year-old Bizzie that this was what was going to happen to her, she never would have believed it. There's no way. Because it just felt so far from possible in those moments. So to anyone who's listening who has dealt with anxiety, there is a future where that is not plaguing your everyday life, because it can limit, I think, your future prospects so much that it can put people into suicidality and a total existential crisis.
I mean, I had to walk around with a full queen size down comforter wrapped around me going into like restaurants because of my panic attacks when I was, you know, not even 20 yet. So I can attest to that. Anybody who knew me back then and knows me now has seen me become an entirely different person. I mean, I've literally, like a caterpillar, like melted down to a liquefied substance and reorganized. And it is completely possible. I'm not saying, I say this all the time, I'm not Buddha in mudra pose on a mountaintop all day. You know, life is still lifing, and I face challenges all the time. And sometimes I still get anxious, and sometimes I still get this and that. And I have all the tools that I need. And I have, in so many ways, epigenetically rewired things that I just experience life very differently now. But it's interesting, because what we're talking about too is the disconnection between, you know, how the body is a cage sometimes. But it's not. It's actually your portal to freedom, but it's the relationship you have with it. And, you know, the mind will lie to you all the time, but the body cannot lie. But who are you giving airtime to? Who are you giving the microphone to? Who are you letting call the shots? You know? And then when you have that level of awareness and that level of agency, what are you doing to make sure that you're taking the best possible care with those choices that you then get to make? Which is why I think, you know, us talking about what you've created is really, really powerful thing, because there are resources that will take you from A to Z, right? And sometimes it's even just giving yourself the option of being curious about it It doesn't mean you have to dive in and be like, I totally believe, if this sounds super woo-woo to you or whatever, right? But even just that level of curiosity, to your point with, well, I was told there is no God and we don't believe in God, but there was a curiosity in me. And I'm not saying that I'm going full on, Jesus freak or whatever, but I'm taking the step of curiosity towards, well, what if I feel differently? What if I think differently? Right? And I think that that's just something really important to call out for anybody that's listening, right? That anytime your curiosity is piqued, to give yourself the permission to lean in a little, to just find the next answer, to follow your curiosity, like they are little breadcrumbs that are leading you somewhere. And that was my little, I digress, and I just went off on a little tangent, but I just felt like that was important to call out because you're making some really great points that I think people can relate to and see themselves in. Okay, so all of that being said, picking the story back up.
So anxiety attacks start to reach this peak, and as soon as my dad tells me he's going to kick me off his insurance, then I decide, well, I'll just sleep in my car in the parking lot of the hospital, so that just in case, this way I'll get through it on my own, and then as long as I survive it, I don't have to like flop myself onto the cement and wave my hand, right? Eventually I do have a very incredible spiritual encounter that completely snaps me out of it. So this one day I am driving in my car in a blizzard. At the time I was going to University of Colorado, and it was winter and just crazy chaotic blizzard, and I was having a panic attack in the car. So I just found a spot to pull over. I was like, okay, I just need to pull over. I can't see anything. And I pulled over right next to a church, and I'd never been in a church in my whole life. I was raised Jewish, but obviously, as we can all now gather, very secular, culturally Jewish. So I'd never been in a church in my whole life, and I kind of go up to the door just to see if there's a way for me to get some water to splash on my face and try to calm down. And I go to the door, and there's this pastor, his name was Gene Binder, and he was like, hey, how's it going? I was like, I've been better. Can I use the bathroom? He was like, yeah, it's right there. So I go to the bathroom, come out, and he was just like, hey, are you from New York? And I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, me too. He's like, are you Jewish? And I was like, yeah. He's like, hey, me too. And I was like, what? We're in a church. What are you talking about? How do you know this? This is so weird. And he's like, come into my office. So we have this long, very deep spiritual, physical, or philosophical conversation where I was able to ask a lot of hard questions. And every time I'd push further and further, he was able to give me answers that were well articulated, showed me that he was thinking critically. And at the end, he was like, so you should come back and we'll have lunch again. So I started to kind of go back and have these spiritual, critical thinking lunches with this pastor. And he introduces to me Jesus, which at this point in my life, I literally had been programmed to believe that an adult believing in Jesus was similar to an adult still believing in Santa Claus. So there was a lot of resistance there, but he was always willing to meet my hard questions with, like I said, like good critical thinking. So we start having more conversations about Jesus, and one day I'm on an airplane and I start having a panic attack. And at this point, it was one of those awkward, like, Jesus, if you're really real, right? Yeah. I had my forehead on the tray table and I was just trying to breathe. And I was like, Jesus, if you're really real, I will believe in you for the rest of my life if you can release me from these panic attacks. Like, I will be a follower. I will dig into the word. I will learn about this and I will take it seriously. Just please, if you're real, release me from my panic attacks. And I have never had another one ever again. So that obviously changed something in me. And I think there are a lot of levels to that, because it was a new level of faith, which I feel like faith really is the exact opposite of fear, where prior to that, a lot of control mechanisms are going to lead to panic attacks because you're in anticipation. How am I going to control a future outcome? How am I going to prepare for X, Y, and Z possibility? So there is also this transaction in that act where you are really stepping into faith and surrender and saying, I don't know, but I trust that somehow you're going to figure it out. So in some way, it almost was like I literally cast aside all of my worry and my fear and my baggage and was just like, here, if you're real, take it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, something that my coach always told me was, so often, the antidote to fear is, one thing is facts, but another antidote is realizing, really knowing, really trusting that no matter what happens, you will always have the resources to handle it, as long as you don't judge the resource that you're using, right? If you don't judge how you get through it, you'll get through it. And you don't have to be anxious about it. So it's interesting through the years, all of the ways that I've noticed what resources I've used, or hearing other people's stories about what resources they used. And a resource could be anything from a full mental breakdown, right? A panic attack, finding Jesus. I mean, there's a myriad of resources out there, but we'll always find something, right? Whether it's sleeping next to the hospital, it's a resource as long as we don't judge it, right? But had you not used that resource, maybe you never would have gotten to the place where you found a even better resource like Jesus or faith for you. And I think that there's something really permissive about going on that journey for yourself and then sharing it with other people to say, you will find your resources.
Hey fam, it's me, Alexis. Quick pause to shout out something that's not just a sponsor. It's my creation, Soul Sway Practice. This is the evolution of fitness. Think of it like microdosing your own neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, all the good stuff, no substances required. Soul Sway takes what's dulled and deadened and brings it back to life. It's multi-dimensional self-care, movement, mindfulness, meditation that lets you actually hear yourself again, because our lives are loud, compartmentalized, draining. This is your time to come back online, set to curated and kick-ass soundtracks and cinematic backdrops that help remove the outside noise to tune into what matters most, you. This is your time, your practice, your life. Let's make it yours. With subscription-based classes, on demand, or courses, design your practice to not only fit, but enhance your life. Go to soulswaypractice.com and use code LAMN50 for 50% off your first month or year. You're welcome.
One thing I do think is worth bringing up, though, especially because a lot of my practice is focused around anxiety, OCD, and intrusive thoughts. Sometimes for anxiety, facts actually make things worse. So a lot of times with anxiety, somebody thinks they want all of the answers and they want the information, but often I think the underlying mechanism and architecture of anxiety is that they're more likely to weaponize those facts against themselves, which is why I think ultimately for me, the faith was kind of acknowledging I'm not going to have all the facts and it's not possible for me to have the facts, and really my seeking of the facts and truth is actually partially landed me here. I don't mean facts
about the future. Okay. I actually mean facts in terms of like physical regulation. Like I am sitting in this chair.
Right, like being physically embodied and present in your moment. Yeah, that makes total sense.
I have a roof over my head.
Yes.
I do not need to sleep on the street tonight. I mean, like really rooted basic facts like about why you're safe.
That makes so much sense.
About why you're resourced, about how you will be resourced. Right. So good distinction. But yeah, I think that there's also something to the onslaught of new resources that are becoming available, like brain mapping, or for me, the DeMartini method, or whatever. Like, I think there is so much that is available now with the burgeoning era of psychology and coaching and neuroscience and all of these things that are giving people even more access than ever before to being able to make the choice to create that change, to give them the possibility of what you've experienced, what I've experienced, which is being free from what can be absolutely paralyzing.
Yes, very true.
Really paralyzing. Okay, so you've created this mapping as a result of that experience, and what else?
So that led me into a deeper or different spiritual understanding. And then from that point, my whole life got completely flipped upside down. And I had been on track to go to the Olympics for skiing. That was my focus in everything that I was doing. And I had a career-ending knee injury, tore both ACLs in one jump, and found myself in a yoga class for the first time trying to rehab my knees because I didn't want to have surgery. So I'm in this yoga class, and I'd never obviously done it before. It was my first one. And at the end, I'm laying down in Shavasana, and the teacher comes over and just like puts her hands on my shoulders because she could tell that something was obviously happening with my physical body that I wasn't aware of. I just remember feeling like I went so far in meditation that I couldn't get myself back, and almost like trying to run through these doors and trying to figure out how to get back to her voice. But I just went too deep for the first time, and I didn't understand how I had done it. So she put her hands on my shoulders, and then when I finally came back, she asked me to stay afterward. And she was just like, I don't know how to explain this, but I got such a strong sensation that you were going to become a very famous yoga teacher. Like, how long have you been practicing? And I was like, this is my first class. She's like, your first class ever? I was like, yes, ever. And she was just like, okay, let's just sit here for a second. So I start pursuing yoga, go down that path. Simultaneously, around the same time, I'm walking down the street in Boulder, and this older woman named Elizabeth starts chasing me down the street. Long gray hair. She's, I have a message for you. I'm like, okay. So I stop, and she tells me that I'm going to become one of the most famous students of Dolores Cannon, who is a past life regression therapist. And at this point, I have no idea who that is. I don't believe in past lives. So at this point, I'm like, this lady's crazy. I have no idea what she's doing. I didn't really understand, even at that point, how people's spiritual gifts work or how the gift of the prophetic worked. I knew that I'd had that one moment where somehow that pastor just knew that I was Jewish and from New York. But other than that little blip, I'd never really experienced something like that before. So I was extremely skeptical. But I heard her out, and she's like, yeah, there's this bookstore right there. You've never heard of Dolores Cannon? I'm like, no, I've never heard of her. You can go to this bookstore. The books are right there. So I wander to the Lighthouse bookstore in Boulder, and I go check it out. And it was my first time stepping into anything related to the term metaphysical. And at this point, I'm 19 years old, and I'm looking around all these books, and I'm like, whoa, this is like a whole different universe. And it's so contrary to anything that I'd been raised to believe. So I'm looking through the bookshelves, I'm going into these books, and the first book that I pick up is The Convoluted Universe. And I'm looking through it, and I'm like, wow, I mean, even if this woman was literally just trying to market these books to me, I'm into it, and I'm going to read this book. So this book, I don't know if my approximation is correct, but it felt really long. It was probably close to 1,000 pages. It was like this thick. So I read it, soak it up super fast. And the next day I was like, oh my God, I have to get trained by this woman. Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of in my life. So I go on her website, and this was back in the probably like 99, 2000, back when you were excited to get on a mailing list, you know, not like you were going to get chased and stalked every single day of your life. So I get on the mailing list because she's not teaching people how to do her method yet. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe this whole thing was just totally made up and fabricated, but whatever. At this point, I'm still kind of flexible as always. And sure enough, like a week later, I get an email. Dolores is opening up her first ever training in her methodology. You know, apply here. So I apply. And I have my own skepticism at work here. So instead of filling out the application as they've asked me to fill it out, I basically was like, well, if this person was right, then I'm going to get in either way, right? Just me kind of like daring my destiny, which I do feel like is some stubborn quality that I've had since I was little. Like, oh yeah, if this is really meant to be, then if I do this and this, it'll still happen. So just my little way of testing it. And sure enough, I get in, I get trained by her, and I spent from roughly 19 years old to about 25 very focused on that sort of hypnotherapy practice. I'd had profound experiences right out of the gate. Then I get to a place where I'm like, okay, how do I both believe in Jesus and then also spend all my time processing people's past lives? What's really going on here? And I had spent so many years working with people's subconscious, which I feel ultimately was why I was brought into that work. And it was less about the past life regression aspect of it and more the repetition of connecting with everyone's subconscious and learning how the subconscious communicates to us, how it hides things, what its subtle tells are, and how ultimately to bypass a person's conscious protective mechanisms and actually get to the underlying truth. So big picture, I think those 5 years were more spent preparing me for the work that I would be doing with break method than the work itself. Because I think I now, at this point in my life, and I've talked about this on some podcasts, is I do think the more likely scenario is that we house the memories of our ancestors on our bioinformation, and that some of us are more easily able to pull those files off of our bioinformation. And I realize that's a widely contested topic, but I think where I sit now, that is ultimately how I reconcile the two, is that we can have memory, and because we're experiencing it through our eyes or our sort of perception of reality, even if our eyes are closed and we're visualizing, it may feel like it was us, but it actually could just be information that is housed in our DNA from previous ancestors, which ultimately the whole hypothesis of Dolores Cannon's work is that those unresolved issues can still impact you epigenetically, which I absolutely do believe. And I think there's been extensive studies that have proven that there is something there, even if it's not really moved past theory at this point. So I had all these years of being able to understand the subconscious, and there was another prophecy spoken over me during that time that I was going to take her work in a completely different direction that she could never have conceived of. And at the time I was like, okay, cool. But really I can see now where the two interconnect, because my work is very much understanding subconscious programming and how it actually creates these patterns of self-deception that we utilize to both play out these behavior mechanisms, how our personality is expressed, but also how we justify both our own demise or just our behavior at large. And you've talked a bit about agency, and I think what my work has proven is that there are some people that have a high level of agency and they can make decisions on their own behalf and they can actually step forward and take ownership. But actually the majority of human beings do not have that readily available because the self-deception is so deep. Yeah, it can be so deep.
I had to work for it. I worked fucking hard for it. Mm-hmm. It's not something that is necessarily going to come easily for everybody. That's for sure.
And trying to
navigate, but it is available to everybody if they work for it. And I think that's a big message for people to hear and to look in the mirror at.
So if you understand how these self-deceptive patterns play out, the most likely culprit here when you're dealing with certain brain pattern types is that right when you're over the target zone, let's say you're working with a coach or you're working with a therapist, when they're over a target zone of something that's actually very important and it's a breakthrough you need to have, the most likely culprit is that your self-deception is going to start to make you feel victimized, and it's going to be likely to make you distort what that person is saying to you, how they're saying it, so that you can essentially get out of the situation without actually doing the work or having to face it. And it can be really challenging to navigate through that. And many people, honestly, even if they have the right tools, the self-deception is so strong. And especially, I think the trends that have happened in the mental health space right now, which are much more soft and affirmational and not really willing to push you into those hard places, those people, if they don't find somebody who is tough and skilled at getting them through that place, they may
That's the DeMartini method. I mean, he's right up in there, and he is holding you accountable as accountable gets. But you're right, there's not a lot of people that like a confrontational approach, which is why I think things have softened a bit. But everybody's gonna decide in the end what they want to do with their one precious life, right? And I'm so grateful that for me, my circumstances and, you know, my makeup, nature and nurture, eventually led me to a place where, you know, I'm going, you know, okay, horses, here's the water. And that's what we can do, right? But I think doing this type of service work is a very high calling. I think it's a really high calling. So sounds like this natural progression, if you will, of your personal experiences, the invitations that found their way to you, the prophecies that found their way to you, your openness and availability to being curious about those things, just feels like there was evolution after evolution, skin shedding after skin shedding, you just growing and swelling more and more into this calling. So how did it become this scientific, data-driven thing that it is today?
So when I was 25, I had my first daughter. She's actually turning 15 in a few days, which is wild.
My gosh.
And I unfortunately had a really severe birth trauma with her, and she died for 20 minutes during my birth. And she has cerebral palsy as a result of that, but she has worked incredibly hard, and she's such a little baddie. If anyone checks out my Instagram, they'll see her on it. She's actually pursuing a career in stand-up comedy, which is awesome.
By the way, I used to be in entertainment for a long time, and I actually worked in comedy for a very long time at a very high level. And one of my dear friends is a very successful comic with cerebral palsy, Josh Blue.
Oh my gosh, I need to send her that name.
Yeah.
She's
he won Last Comic Standing. He's
what?
Yeah.
And
he's incredible. One of the greatest comics. Yeah.
So yeah, she has to do hers with her voice app on her phone, but it's like part of her whole shtick.
It's hilarious though.
She's really funny.
I love that.
She's turned all of her drama into serious comedy.
Oh my gosh, I'd be happy to introduce her to Josh.
Oh, she would love that. I'll surprise her with that for her birthday.
You're all in on this. Like, we're going to do a little connection here, people. We're all in on it.
It would make her day. She's amazing. So this birth just spiraled out of control. Somehow my midwife just completely lost the plot, and Sarai's biological dad at that point ended up reviving her for 20 minutes while effectively everyone was like, your daughter's gone, worry about your wife, and he would not stop. So after 20 minutes, my dog barked because we were at home, and her pink came back into her face and she came back to life. At the time, her biological dad had already been struggling with bipolar disorder, and this pushed him just enough over the edge that really, I always tell people, it was like after that day I never really saw my husband again. He was more just withdrawn and disconnected. It was like his spirit just left. And what went next was a 2-year very deep, dark period by which I was trying to think positively about what my daughter was capable of and kind of dispel what the doctors were telling me about her destiny, and just really try to envision what my daughter was going to be capable of, even if the doctors thought I was crazy. And unfortunately, he just really, in that deeper depression, bought into the destiny picture that these doctors painted for him. And he got to just such a deep, dark place that he would start to say things like, 3 bullets, that's all it would take. And I'm like, buddy, we don't want to die. We're good. This is a you problem. We're getting through this. And every time something like that would happen, it would keep escalating. I was just like, wow, either he's going to kill us or kill himself. And it's just like, I had to just kind of face the facts. And eventually we had a place where his mom had reached out to me and just said, hey, you have a lot on your plate. Your career is taking off. You're trying to make money to support your daughter. Send him home. Let me take care of him. And he only survived maybe another 6 to 8 weeks before he committed suicide. And it happened the day that we were actually going to pick him up at the airport. He was coming back supposedly to see her. So that was a very intense trauma, but it was, as many traumas are, again, it can be a very profound teacher. And my natural brain pattern style is to be very present in the trauma. Ironically, my coping mechanism doesn't get me in the moment. It's more after the fact when I'm trying to sort through it. So in the moment, very present, very focused. And getting through that to the other side taught me so much about how I can be as a woman, how I can be as a mother, right? Because now there's another life on the line here. And I remember having this choice point where everyone in my life wanted me to be more upset. My mom would call me, why aren't you crying? What is wrong with you? What kind of a cold-hearted person are you? And I remember just thinking right when it happened, I was like, I'm going to give myself 5 days to be as messy as I need to be. Whatever happens in the next 5 days, I brought a couple of my friends in to stay with my daughter and I was like, I don't know what's going to happen for 5 days. But I marked it on the calendar. I'm like, on that day, I'm closing this chapter and I'm not going to let this ruin my life and my daughter's life. He wouldn't want that. She can't handle that. I have to be very present to raise a special needs child. And at that point, even the first year, she was off and on seizure medication. It was like very high stakes. And I just remember saying on this 5th day, like, I'm done. And I woke up on the 5th day and was like very resolved. I'm going to get through this. Life is somehow going to be better. There's going to be a gift in this. And it really pissed people off. And I think death in general can sometimes bring out people's worst qualities. And there were certainly people that they wanted me to keep lingering with this sort of sadness. And I refused to do it. And throughout that entire year, I think sometimes if we're present to the pain and we have that spiritual connection, what we need, the resources that we need will come. And for 4 years straight, every time I had a question, why would this happen? Why would that happen? What is this behavior mechanism? Why am I perceiving reality this way? It literally was like my paradigm just shifted from this experience, and I was never the same again. And from this paradigm shift, information just started pouring through me. So now is like this spirit who already was pretty connected and tapped in and already good at pattern recognition, now has this childhood trauma, goes through the hardship with anxiety, learns how to kind of navigate her way out of that by the grace of God, then experiences more trauma. But at this point now, it's like I had all these underlying layers and foundation where now it was like somehow what was coming through with how to fix it, it had all these other layers and moving parts that could all work together now. Now I just knew more. I had more life experience. I had been in the pits of despair. I had experienced all these different types of loss, right? Like an accidental loss of a partner, a suicidal loss of a partner. And it just made me fairly indestructible. The girl that was once worried about what she could possibly do with her future, I now at this point just felt kind of bulletproof. And in that position of feeling bulletproof and feeling very, like you've been talking about, like just very intensely knew exactly what agency I had and what I could do with my life. And I wasn't looking to anyone outside of myself to solve my problems for me. My life just took off rapid fire, and I started getting clarity on all these diagrams. I'm now like drawing all these diagrams, and at this point in my career I was already lecturing in a variety of different capacities, so it was like the work that I had been doing now just kind of shifted. So the content did this slight pivot where it was a little bit more spiritual, metaphysical, and now it started to become much more scientific and data driven and extremely logical. And then years later, I created Break Method in 2014. So now we're 11 years down the line. So it has not been overnight. I don't think I realized in 2014 that I was building a data-driven tech company at all. I was building a mental health methodology and intervention. Over the years, that has transformed because I have mapped and aggregated so many brain patterns. I think from that initial position, I knew that I was seeking the answers to why our perception of reality becomes distorted by what happens to us in childhood, and how to effectively correct that distortion so that we stop lying to ourselves and can actually take ownership of what we're doing and fix it. So I think I always knew that that's what I was doing, but it took many years to understand how that would then be transformed into both a technology platform and now a nationally accredited therapeutic modality.
Woo! Wow. I mean, what a epic story of human resilience and turning your mess into your message and water into wine, Jesus stuff.
For sure.
I mean, really, it is magnificent. And it's truly incredible how, you know, every single one of us has our own moments, right? It's not up for competition or comparison, who had it worse or whatever. Like, to each their own. Everybody's dealing with their own challenges, right? But there is also something really basic and really awesome in, if she can do it, I can do it.
I totally agree with that.
And thank you for being that beacon for anybody that's listening. Well, fuck, if she can do it, I can do it.
Hell yeah.
We all can do it, right? Such a such a beautiful gift. That's what I love about the message of this podcast. It's just people's ability to see themselves as not alone, see, you know, a version of themselves reflected in other people's resilience and resourcefulness. And I know that anybody that just heard that story can walk away with, at the very least, that, if not so much more. Okay, so you've built this game changer, this masterpiece of this brain mapping, and you've written this book. It's about to come out, and you're now facing forward on the timeline. What is being visioned for what's to come? As much as, you know, we also have to surrender to the universe's plans. What would you like to, like, what intentions do you hold? What would you like to infuse that future with?
I think break method and brain pattern mapping as a whole challenge the entire mental health paradigm. I was recently welcomed into a program in Johns Hopkins University. They had selected 15 people that they felt had the most compelling solution to the substance use disorder crisis using technology. And when I was at that 5-day-long event, I ended up interfacing with people from NIH and from different sort of government policy bodies, in addition to like FDA regulation, and then also obviously professors and doctors. When I left the event after interfacing with everybody and we all had to do these small pitches, when I gave my pitch after having days of extremely positive feedback on the ground, we were in clinical settings, everyone's like, oh my God, this is going to change the world. Like, so excited. I'm giving my mini pitch and I can see the look on some of these professors' faces getting bright red. Like, they looked like they wanted to kill me. One in particular. And when I'm done, this one professor who had been shaking the most was like, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I mean, the second you even suggested that we lie to ourselves, I checked out. And I was like, well, that was the third word of the entire pitch. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. Right. So I got through it and all of that. And at the end, you know, we're all kind of changing positions and everyone's taking a bathroom break. And one of the high up people at NIH comes and sits down next to me and he goes, that was wildly inappropriate of her. I hope you know that. And I was like, it's fine. I understand that my work is triggering. And he goes, what you are bringing into the world is truly novel, and it's actually one of the only novel things in this entire room, right? And I'm the only one there that's not a doctor, essentially. So I already was an outsider for that reason. And he said that if what your product does actually works, you will make her entire career irrelevant and will erase it off the face of the map. And she knows it, and I know it, and all the people in the room knew that, but nobody wants to confront that. So here's what I'll tell you. Don't change your message for anybody. Don't water it down. Don't stop, because there are a million of her and the system does not want to change, but you need to change it. And he handed me his card and he was like, don't stop for a second. You're going to piss off everybody, but keep going. And if you ever need help,
Disruptor.
So I think big picture, I always knew that about what break method is and how brain pattern mapping works and disrupts the entire mental health paradigm. But I think that was the real life evidence where it wasn't just what I think is going to happen, but I actually got to bump up against the system itself and be like, oh no, this is agitating. I really am going to piss people off. So when I think about the future, I feel very secure in break method truly shattering our entire psychology and mental health paradigm. And I do think that if we fast forward 20 years from now, everyone that at one point poo-pooed it because I'm not a doctor will eventually come around and realize that it probably was one of the more profound discoveries that we've had in mental health, because what we've discovered with brain pattern mapping is unlike anything else that has ever been done. Because we really are, and this bothers people to say it, because of course our nature somewhat matters. Our nurture has a far more profound effect on how we perceive reality than our nature. It's not even a close call. And with brain pattern mapping, there are 200 historical data points that we can use to accurately predict patterns of thought, behavior, and decision making with 98.3% accuracy. So effectively what that does is it shows us 9 markers where I can sit across from a client and tell them everything about themselves, the secrets that they keep, all of their subtle tells that maybe somebody would take 10 years to get to know or not at all, that would never come out in narrative-based therapy. We know that in 20 minutes. So that is such a radical paradigm shift because it stands in direct opposition to talking about your story and looping on your story and talking about your feelings. Instead, it gets to the underlying architecture that eventually generates feelings and generates behavior. And most of what we do is you address behavior at the level of behavior, which is a total waste of time. If telling somebody when they're constantly picking up a cup, just don't pick up the cup, worked, then we'd all be fine. But you can't just tell somebody, don't pick up the cup. Because there's so many other thought processes and language that your brain generates that far precede you even looking at the cup. That's where you have to do the rewiring work. So Break Method actually makes it extremely individualized and strategic and lays out an incredible roadmap right away so that you know exactly how to rewire and how long it's going to take and exactly what little toggles have to be turned on or off and in what sequence for the brain and body to actually come back into congruence and for your nervous system to reset and for you to learn how to have dynamic range instead of just do everything one way. So the future, I think, holds that Break Method will actually really shatter that paradigm. And I think one of the big misses that we have in our society is not integrating tools like Break Method into elementary and middle school. So I think the future for us also holds finding a way for us to spearhead bringing this into education, because mental health and education I don't think should be separated. And if we stop separating them, we would likely have future generations that are not struggling the way our current generations are struggling.
Big vision, and I love it. Stamp of approval. Not that you need it.
Thank you. Well, I will take it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm on your cheering squad. I love this. Okay, we're going to close with me asking you the question that we ask everybody on this podcast. So I want you to imagine that there's a mirror in front of you. Mm-hmm. And everything on the outside world, all of the external gaze, agendas, pressures, judgments, stories, all just fade away. And you are left alone with the you that you were at 3 when you saw what you saw, the you were when you slept outside those hospitals, the you that you were when you stumbled into that church, all the yous that you have been up until the woman that you are sitting here today. Having a moment of internal gaze, self-recognition, self-awareness, self-validation, that no matter what you've done or not done, you are worthy of love. What is it that you have to say to that gaze reflected back at you in this moment?
I'm proud of you and I know you could do it. And this actually is a more profound experience for me, what you just laid out, because I can't say that I know how it's possible, but I have a very vivid memory of being about 5 years old. My parents had this, we had tons of gardens in the back of our house when we moved to Connecticut. And my mom had this one garden that was surrounding this huge rock. And I would often go sit on this rock and just, think about things and just hang out there. And I remember clear as crystal being 5 years old and having an older version of myself visit me and say, hey, things are going to get really bad here. And actually having a pretty clear outline of what was going to happen to me and just saying, it's going to be okay. You're going to get to the other side of this and it will all be worth it. And I can't ever fully put my finger on how that happened or why I have that memory, but I vividly remember like a 30-something-year-old version of me visiting my 5-year-old on the rock and telling me, things are going to get pretty shitty, but you're going to be okay and it will all be worth it. So I think big picture, as soon as I did that, it was almost like I went back to that same loop of, I'm proud of you and we did it, because I'm not in a perpetual trauma response. I'm in the marriage of my dreams. I have 4 kids. I have 8 businesses. I did it. I made it against so many odds. And
look at you now.
And anybody can do that. Look at me. Look at you now. Look at me now.
Yeah.
It is 100% possible.
Bizzie Gold's Excellent Adventure.
Yes.
I love it.
One day maybe that'll be a book.
Maybe. Or a movie. I can't thank you enough for being here. And I want to make sure that anybody that is listening to this and wants to be part of your world can find you. Tell us how.
So you can look on breakmethod.com. We work with individuals, couples, and families. In our rewiring program, anybody can take brain pattern mapping. All those links are easy access on the website. We also train practitioners and HR directors in how to utilize brain pattern mapping. So we also have people utilize the technology side of it as well. You can also find me on buzziegold.com. I have other modalities and things that I teach as well. And my book, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar, comes out on June 3rd on all retailers.
Holy smokes. There's a lot to dig into, people. You will not be bored in Bizzie's world. That is for sure.
I would hope.
A lot of opportunity digging in to everything that she has to offer. I'm so grateful that you made your little pit stop here on this podcast. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody who's listening. I sincerely, genuinely adore you, like from the bottom of my heart. And we'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.
Join us for Look at Me Now, wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to share, like, and subscribe.